Hello my dear sewing friends, it's Alisa here, and today once again in the Made from Scraps series we are going to be combining dozens if not hundreds of tiny little scraps in order to make a jacket. And this time I'm thinking about sort of like a more traditional way of combining fabric scraps, something like quilting, where you take a simple geometric shape like a square or a triangle and then you piece it together into a continuous yardage more or less, and then you cut the patterns out of it, opposed to what I usually do with fabric scraps is where I try to make some sort of an interesting combination with what I have. Now before we start working on it though, I have to determine just what am I going to use for it, what's the color combination, what's the idea. And I went through all of these fabric scraps. All of these are cotton spandex, and I have 3 different types of orange that all work really well together. I have this lighter orange, this kind of soft orange right in the middle, and then this bright orange. So I'm thinking combining all of these 3 together could be quite interesting. Now before I commit cutting everything that I have into little squares, because scraps are very deceiving. It looks like you have a ton of scraps, but once you start working with them, usually it's not enough. So you always have to plan ahead and definitely measure 3 times before you cut. So before I cut everything, I want to cut enough for one pattern piece, let's say a sleeve or like the front pattern piece or something, and I want to count how many squares it takes exactly, so that way I can at least estimate if I'm going to have enough or not. Now I decided on a square that measures about 3 inches by 3 inches or approximately 7.5 centimeters, and that decision was made purely on the size of the scraps that I had. So it's not too big, not too small, and would use up the scraps without creating too much waste. I also try to think what kind of dimensions of the squares would be the best when it comes to the garment that I'm going to make. Plus, I'm making this for my daughter, so I wanted something that would be proportionate to a child's body. Next, of course, comes the painstaking process of cutting all of the squares out. And while we're at it, I want to mention that all of the squares are cut on grain. So that way, in the process of sewing and in the process of wearing, washing, and all of that, we don't see any puckering or skewing, and the garment can last us a really long time. The fabric scraps that I'm using, they're all knit, they're all of the same content, so it's cotton and spandex mix. They're also all of the same weight, which makes my life easier because then I don't have to really think about adjusting or compensating for the different weights of fabrics when I combine them together in one garment. And I know that I mentioned this before, but in case if you didn't see other Made from Scraps videos, all of these knit fabric scraps came from Thunder Pants. It's a slow fashion undergarment brand that sells offcuts from their productions to us, people who sew and who want to experiment with fabric scraps. Let's talk about the pattern because that is quite important. And I find that when I'm working on something like this, where we have quite a lot of seams, quite a lot of connections, plus we want whatever we do to the fabric to be the star of the show. So in that case, I go for a very, very simple pattern that at the first glance is nothing special, but that's exactly what we want, because then it's going to make the garment flow better without all of the extra seams and extra darts and whatnot. What you see here is a base for a self-drafted jacket, as most of the times that's what I do on the channel. It's derived from a relaxed knit bodice block, and it's for my daughter, but I follow exactly the same steps for my own relaxed fit jackets as well, and I do have tutorials for them on the channel, so if you'd like to see them, you'll find them in the description. Turns out that the sleeve is just about the size of this mat, so that is going to be the perfect starting point. Now I just have to figure out what would be the best arrangement and if I want to create some sort of a pattern from these little squares. Now you also have to keep in mind that sewing all of these together will eat up about 1/4 of an inch from each side of the square, which is going to make the final result smaller than what you see right now. So you have to account for a larger amount of squares in order to make that pattern piece happen. Once I'm finally happy with the arrangement of the little squares, it is time to move to the next step. And that, of course, is putting this all together. And here I'm going to switch from my Bernette to my trusted Zinger, because I do like lightning stitch on my Zinger a little bit better than on Bernette, specifically when I need to press the seam open, which is going to be the basis of putting this all together. So the first step is placing the squares right sides together with correct grain and then sewing them with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Option number 1 is to do it with a lightning stitch on a sewing machine. Option number 2 would be to do a chain stitch on the cover stitch. Both work really well. Now once I had assembled a couple of rows and a couple of columns, then I would press the seam allowances open and then top stitch. I did my top stitching on a cover stitch, but you can also do it on a sewing machine with a twin needle. Turns out that a single sleeve required 33 little squares, so from here I started working on the bodice. As I mentioned before, in projects like these, a lot of bulk is created by all of the little connection seams. So I tend to like to avoid as much as I can, especially if the pattern that we chose is a very simple one, and that's the reason why I go this route. Because what I like to do is to get rid of the side seam, and that way we can just continue putting all the squares in a row, avoiding the unnecessary extra side seam. Now here I have laid out all of the squares for the bodice, and you can also probably spot that I ran out of the middle orange, so the back features just 2 orange shades and I had to improvise with that. And here you can see how the pattern without the side seam compares to the raw squares. Since the bodice piece is way bigger than the sleeve, I did work on it in blocks because the throat space of my cover stitch machine isn't big enough to push through a large project, so I had to sort of divide and conquer. While we're at it, let me show you the reverse side of these little pieces. In the process, I also decided to put in pockets. You can see that they are at the connection point of one of the blocks for the bodice. Now after that, I was able to cut both sides of the bodice and then connect them at the center back. It is indeed a lot of sewing and piecing for sure, but more time was actually spent on calculating the fabric scraps and the overall flow of the project. To line the jacket, my daughter chose this really fun rayon knit, so putting the jacket together and then lining it is the next step. As smooth as it might seem in the video, most of the times things don't go exactly as we plan. Sometimes the deviations of the plan aren't really that noticeable because we come up with solutions on the fly. Sometimes they put you in a roadblock and you're just kind of like, what am I supposed to do? So the original idea here for this jacket was actually to do ribbing on the bottom, ribbing on the cuffs, and a ribbing on the neckline. And I didn't have the ribbing in color that would match these sort of orange tones, but I do dye my fabric quite often, so I thought, you know what, I do have orange, let me see if I can dye some of the white ribbing that I have into an orange color. And I'm not sure if you can see it on camera or not, but this orange is of a different tone than the orange that I'm working with, and it might not seem like a big deal, you know, from the beginning, but when you put this next to all of the orange squares, you can clearly see that it doesn't match. So I went through all of this trouble of dyeing this piece of orange ribbing, which I do have a project to use it in, so it's not a complete waste. We're definitely going to use this up, but I had to come up with a different solution, and that solution wasn't necessarily the one that I was hoping for from the very beginning, but that is the solution that I have to go with, so we'll just have to do it. At first, this included going through the scraps one more time and finding enough for creating the facing. Then adding the facing to the lining, and then of course installing the zipper and sewing it all together. Now the lining technique that I'm using here is one of my favorites for these type of jackets, and it gets turned out through the sleeves, which makes it really easy in assembly. I have a full tutorial for it on the channel. After that, I just have to finish the cuffs, for which I used the same scraps as for the jacket since the ribbing did not work out. There is a members extra for this project where we do a deep dive, we'll look inside of the garment, we'll discuss some additional techniques, some additional little things, and I also answer the questions from the members of the channel. So thank you so much for being a part of this membership, and if you are a member, make sure that you check out all of your members perks, not just members extra deep dive for this project, but for many others. There's over 100 members extra videos and plenty of other perks. And for all of you guys, there's more than 500 videos on the channel for everybody to watch. Plenty of inspiration, plenty of projects, from pattern drafting to using up your fabric scraps to everything in between, as I love sewing with all my heart. So definitely check them out. All right, it's time. Let's take a look at the final result. So, what do you guys think? I must say, from my own personal perspective, that I am not a huge fan of this sort of traditional patchworking when it comes to making clothes out of that kind of technique, but I do quite like this little jacket, and the most important part, my daughter loves it as well. She loves bright colors, so this is right up her alley. She says that bright colors make her happy, so I truly hope that whatever project that you choose to do next is going to make you happy. And if you need more made from scraps projects, click right over here. And if you want to see how to draft your own patterns, I have the perfect video just for you right over here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!